I'm trying to see how I can not look so dark on here. Do I look really dark to you guys?
Yeah, if you shut your blinds, that may help. I have
You
to do
think
that with
so?
mine.
I've never used this room before. I have this office in my house that I never use. So I said, let me use it today because it's Sunday. And it's just not working. Let me see.
Oh, well, that may make everything totally dark.
Really? I have this light that I have no idea. Like, well, I shouldn't. Okay, maybe I have this light over.
Oh, there you
Oh,
go.
that's better.
That's perfect.
Yeah. Okay.
A little bit.
Okay. Well,
I don't know if
will
it's
go ahead.
gonna stay, but
Nope, it didn't stay. There you go. Go really close to your screen, Andrea.
I know I did that because I've been messing with it for the past 5 minutes. So
Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and screen share now.
sure.
Let's see here. And do you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and start that. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Volstorff, and on behalf of Team Willow, I'd like to thank you for attending our presentation. Tonight, I, along with Mindy Leroy and Andreen Thompson, will speak with you about an important social justice issue. This evening, we will describe why suicide is a social injustice and why we must do something about it. We'll discuss the prevalence and costs of suicide, and we'll provide our recommendations on what we as a profession can do. As I'm sure most are aware, suicide has been established as a significant health issue, with almost 800,000 annual deaths globally attributed to suicide, according to the World Health Organization. This issue clearly fits within the description of a social injustice when considering the A-Day model of vulnerability. According to the A-Day model, a vulnerable population is one at risk for poor physical, psychological, or social health. As you can see in the attached figure, there are several predictors of populations at risk for vulnerability, and they are all interconnected. At the top is social status, which includes age, gender, race, and ethnicity. This is connected to social capital and human capital. Social capital includes family structure, marital status, voluntary organizations, and social networks. Human capital includes schools, jobs, income, and housing. And at the bottom of the figure, you will see populations at risk, which include higher risk and lower risk groups. All of these sections are interconnected with increased risk of social vulnerability as more and more of these factors are affected. As Andreen will describe shortly, certain age groups have a disproportionately increased risk of suicide. Specifically, teens and young adults appear most at risk. Additionally, those with mental health issues and those at risk for suicide often experience social stressors within their family, as well as a stigma and a sense of isolation in their community. Furthermore, these same people often report disruptions in work and financial stressors. These issues become even more significant among suicide survivors. Nursing theorists would further support the issue of suicide as a social injustice and our need to advocate for this issue. In the text, Philosophies and Practices of Emancipatory Nursing, the author Sally Thorne describes nursing as a social justice. In her writings, she points out that nursing has made an active effort to concern itself with both the health of the individual and the health of populations. The author eloquently states that her purpose in discussing nursing as a social justice is to help the next generation of nurses to understand and value their tradition that is deeply rooted in advocating for the improved health of populations. The author also criticizes the profession of nursing for simply theorizing and not taking true action for social injustices. Thorne proposes that because of the numbers and history of our profession, we should become politically involved in order to institute change. She asserts that in order to become truly powerful as an agent of social change, We need to make sure that our voice is heard. According to her, this can be accomplished through educating ourselves, the public, and making sure the professional associations we belong to have an obvious presence. Finally, to quote Thorne, I envision a future in which nurses regain a sense of genuine pride in their discipline's intellectual history and celebrate their profession's sustained commitment to serving as a powerful source of social justice. So, where can we focus our attention on this social injustice that affects so many? Well, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the US lost over 45,000 lives to suicide in 2016. Specifically, Oregon appears to be disproportionately affected by these suicide rates. Andreen will now discuss more about the shocking statistics related to suicide in Oregon.
Thank you, Paul. In 2017, the suicide death rate in the United States was approximately 44,000, making it the second leading cause of death among Americans ages 10 through 34. With 762 deaths by suicide in 2017, Oregon was ranked 13th among the states. That is, at a rate of 17.77 deaths per 100,000 of the population. Also in Oregon in 2017, suicide was the second leading cause of death for ages 15 to 34, and the third leading cause of death for ages 10 through 14 and 35 through 44. Overall, suicide was the eighth leading cause of death in Oregon in 2017, which is on average one person died from suicide every 12 hours. Furthermore, in 2010, suicide cost Oregon approximately $740 million of combined lifetime medical and work loss costs. That was an average of approximately $1 million per suicide death. There are several sequelae and clinical aspects of suicide. The survivors are usually family members and friends who research has shown that these people are at a greater risk of developing serious medical and psychiatric conditions, such as major depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, acute stress disorder, complicated grief reaction, or acute and transient psychiatric disorder, with many possible complications. Most tragically, evidence also suggests that suicide survivors may be at elevated risk for someday completing suicide themselves. Trauma is the most common psychiatric condition recorded in suicide survivors. A study reported that in suicide bereaved individuals, the rate of recurrent as well as current episode of depression was found to be twice the rate of recurrent and current depression in other bereaved individuals. There is also the financial burden or strain that the bereaved families have to deal with, in addition to the lost productivity that was previously mentioned. So why is suicide a social justice issue, one may ask? Well, social justice is based on the concept of human rights and equality. It can be defined as the way in which human rights are exhibited in everyday lives of people at every level of society. Although there has been considerable amount of research and awareness and attempts to destigmatize mental illness and suicide, it is still one of the most stigmatized conditions in America. The stigma attached to suicide includes heightened levels of guilt, shame, anger, family dysfunction, and social stigmatization. And these issues often prevent at-risk individuals and survivors from opening up and discussing their issues, which are very important for survivors and survivors' recovery, and at-risk individuals to get the care that they need. Suicidal behavior is complex and there is no single cause. It affects people of all gender, ages, and ethnicities. At-risk individuals could be having relationship problems, physical health problems, criminal legal problems, loss of housing due to loss of job because they cannot work due to their mental health issues, financial problems, and substance abuse problems. Now, the United States have an imbalance in the way we treat mental health conditions compared to other physical conditions. Often people living with suicidal thoughts and feeling often have difficulty accessing care. In Oregon in 2016, an evaluation was conducted and there was significant provider to patient disparity, where there were over 5,600 patients to one mental health provider. This is unacceptable because one of the main risk factors of suicide is mental health issues, such as bipolar, depression, or substance abuse disorder. And nearly 90% of all suicides are associated with a diagnosable mental health condition. Now I will turn the presentation over to Mindy, who will discuss some policy solutions.
Thank you, Andrea. Primary prevention is a process that promotes healthy environmental behaviors and reduces the likelihood and frequency of an illness occurring. To understand the relationship between primary prevention and health inequalities, the Prevention Institute developed the Trajectory of Health Inequalities model. This model is a visual representation of how health inequalities are created and where primary prevention strategies are most effective. As you can see in the image, the environment has the largest contribution of inequalities. So focusing on the environment is essential for health equity efforts. When determining a solution for lowering suicide rates, using a framework of prevention impacts the environment, exposure, and work and behaviors, which are the primary determinants of health. The SOS, or Signs of Suicide, is an evidence-based middle and high school prevention program that focuses on decreasing suicide and suicide attempts. It increases knowledge and adaptive attitudes. It encourages help seeking, decreases mental health stigma to depression, and engages parents and school staff, and encourages a community-based partnership. The program has shown a reduction in self-reported suicide attempts by 40 to 64%. A second prevention effort to reduce suicide would be to support physical education in school and after-school sports programs. Studies show that school sport participation during middle and high school may project against poor mental health in early adulthood. Policies to increase school sport participation may be warranted as part of a public health strategy to promote mental health. So when discussing winners and losers of the problem of suicide, there are no winners or losers. I'm going to say that again, sorry. When it comes to suicide, there are no winners and losers. Suicide is a detrimental act that resembles a ripple effect, like when a pebble is thrown into a pond. The first wave represents the closest to that person, to the furthest wave representing the surrounding community. Ultimately, in the way that a pond is changed because of a pebble, an entire community can be changed by a suicide. Suicide also has an economic cost to families, communities, states, and the nation as a whole. So who bears the cost of the prevention solutions we propose? Like the California state funding for school suicide prevention programs set forth by Governor Jerry Brown, Oregon state funding would foster the school suicide prevention program in all public schools. After-school sports programs are typically paid for by families and can be expensive due to participation fees, special equipment needed, and transportation that can prevent low-income families from participating. However, school officials should consider the equity of participation costs across all sport activities so that students interested in sports would have equal access to participation, thus improving mental health. So now Andreen will present the conclusion of this presentation.
Thank you, Mindy. The Milstead framework is used to discuss the process how a suicide prevention policy could be developed and implemented to address the suicide concerns. For the agenda setting, the implementation of a suicide prevention policy in all middle and high schools in Oregon would be an effective policy, as research has shown that suicide prevention activities decrease suicide risk, increase help-seeking behaviors, identify those at risk of suicide, and decrease suicidal behaviors. The school superintendent, the State Department of Education, school-employed mental health professionals such as counselors, psychologists, social workers, and nurses, the school administrators, head of the Parents Teachers Association, local health agencies, law enforcement, and community organizations could advocate for the introduction of a bill that would mandate that all middle and high schools implement a suicide prevention program that would include after-school sports activities. A successful agenda setting and advocacy from mental health professionals and school administrators may lead to the support of local lawmakers, such as state representatives, who can introduce a suicide prevention bill to the state Senate. The school district will receive grants from the state to implement the program. The implementation process would include a similar program that was implemented in California during the 2017-28 school years. The program is based on research and best practices in suicide prevention. The process requires that Oregon Department of Education develop and maintain a model policy to serve as a guide for local educational agencies. The implementation would include workshops to familiarize the school leaders with the requirements of the suicide prevention policy. Staff will be available to assist the schools with strategic planning of how to meet the requirements, which includes staff training, assessment, and intervention. There would be follow-up workshops and meetings that would include training activities to engage the school community and provide a context for why they're being asked to do this. There would be a process in place to ensure that all pertinent staff and students are trained on suicide awareness and prevention. And on an annual basis, schools will be required to report to the state's Department of Education. An evaluation whether schools that accepted the funding actually developed the program would be an effective process measure. Now, since it is expected that with proper education and implementation of the statewide suicide policy, which again would mandate a suicide prevention program in all middle and high schools in Oregon, this program should lead to a decrease in the suicide rate or the number of suicide, which would be an outcome measure. In summary, suicide can be prevented. Suicide is a serious public health problem that affects people of all ages. As this map illustrates, the rate of suicide is increasing, and we must do more to help those individuals who are at risk. When people take their own life, families and often the entire communities are impacted by the shock and grief that follows. The lawmakers and the Department of Education in Oregon can help address this problem by ensuring that schools receive the funding that they need to implement this proposed prevention policy. Thank you. Here are the references. Questions?
So I timed us.
So that sounds good.
I think so.
It was almost exactly 17 minutes.
Oh,
okay,
wonderful.
You did time it? Okay, because I started at 2. So, okay. All right, I started about 2 minutes. That's perfect.
I think it's perfect.
Yes.
Directions, and it said don't go over 25 minutes.
Oh, good, because I've been trying to figure out how to add fluff to give myself a little bit more, and without relying on statistics, there's only so much you can say other than someone else will be sharing this information.
I actually think we did great, and now listening to it, like paying full attention, it actually is a cohesive presentation.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah,
so when I go from my one side to the other, I just kind of got messed up there for the transition.
Okay.
So when I'm done and when I move to winners and losers,
yes,
I wonder, I'm trying to think what I should say. So should I say, who are the winners and losers to this problem? And then
that'd be good.
You flip it over, and then I say, when it comes to suicide, there are no. Okay. So I'm going to say to this problem instead of suicide, because then it doesn't sound like I'm being redundant.
Okay.
So who are the winners and losers to this problem?
Yeah.
Okay.
I found that too, that there were a couple of times where I'm talking and I feel like I just keep saying suicide, suicide,
Yeah.
suicide, like over and over. And I'm like, what else can I say? Social injustice, justice
Right.
issue.
That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So perfect.
Is there anything you would like me to add or subtract from my part?
Oh, I think your part was perfect. I love the
Oh.
introduction.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it was fun.
The ripple in the pond thing.
Oh, I really
Yeah,
like
I like
that.
it. I love it.
I love things like that where it kind of paints a picture for people.
Good.
Because I feel like you get more of an emotional investment in a lecture when people can kind of envision things.
Right. I agree. Yeah, I love that part.
Perfect. All right. That sounds
All
good.
right.
Yay.
Great.
That's
Okay. So
So we
get
meet
back together in a few hours.
Right. At what, 8?
We're meeting.
Right?
8 o'clock. Are we meeting in
Yes.
the BBB? Is that where?
Yes.
So she's gonna send out a link. Is that how it works? That's what I was gonna ask.
Yeah.
Usually, yeah. She sends an invitation and you click on it and go into it.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfect. Have you guys watched any of the other ones?
No.
I haven't. I've just been busy. I haven't been available.
Me either. I wonder how many people will show up to watch us.
Well, there are 2 groups, and that's probably a great question because there are 2 groups. Do you guys want us to go first? I would prefer to go first.
Yeah.
I would much rather go first. Absolutely.
Okay. So we'll ask to go first.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, everybody.
All right. Well,
All
thank
right.
you guys. See you at 7 or 8.
Thank you. We'll see you
All
then.
All
Okay.
right. Bye.
Bye.